Hello YouTube, this is Peter with you once again. And recently, on one of my videos in which I'm talking about politics, I got a comment that said, I liked your videos about logic/atheism better. Now, I get it. I feel you. And I'm not entirely against making those sorts of videos, but every now and then I find myself wondering, what would that even be like in this day and age? Would it have any relevance? Would it get any traction beyond the niche audience that I attracted 15 years ago, right? And the irony, part of the irony, is that when I look at a lot of people who are promoting religion on YouTube, they break down into a few different categories. They all overlap with each other. They're not separate, distinct categories necessarily. But one of those categories is people who are full on for Trump. So if you want me to get away from discussing politics and discuss things like logic and atheism instead, you might be out of luck in that department. I don't know if some of you who have been long-time subscribers to my channel might remember some of my videos in response to the Atheist Antidote. I don't think that's what he calls himself now, but he's very much still around, and he's very much on Team Trump. And I remember seeing one of his videos where he was talking about how he used to be for Ben Carson, but then he saw which way the political winds were blowing, and he jumped on the bandwagon. And look, if you thought Christian music was terrible before, wait till you hear their song about how Trump is the chosen one. Oh boy. Okay, so in one bucket, you have the people who are full on for Trump. So if you're hoping to escape discussions of politics and discuss religion instead, you might be out of luck. And in a way, it's always been that way, because part of what was called the new atheist movement in OG YouTube atheism was responding to the politicization of religion. And at that time, it was very much of the Bush era. They want to ban stem cell research. There's all this public funding for religious schools that they're trying to smuggle in, faith-based initiatives. And all of that is, it's pretty old hat in 2024. But if you go back and you look at things like Jesus Camp, all of those kids, by the way, should be old enough now to vote. But you have I think the kids seem to be roughly in the 8 to 14 age range in Jesus Camp. And you can tell in that documentary that they were being radicalized into right-wing politics. That came out in, I think, 2006, must have been filmed probably in 2005. It was actually made by Nancy Pelosi's daughter. But you see in that documentary that they're praying to a cardboard cutout of George W. Bush. They have somebody radicalizing them about abortion. They go to an abortion protest at the Supreme Court. They're talking about gay marriage when that was a hot political topic during that election season and during the George W. Bush era. So you can see those children being radicalized into Christian nationalism in that documentary. And as I said, you track that years on, and now these kids are old enough to vote, these young adults, as they are now. So a lot of the Trumpist movement has this Christian nationalist side to it. That's also ties into the sorts of discussions that I might talk about on YouTube. So you're not going to escape politics that way. Another way in which you're not entirely going to escape the political discussions while talking about religion is the fact that a lot of the, let's call it the right-wing griftosphere, loves religion. But the problem with even having that discussion is not only that it would veer into politics, but it would probably veer into less criticizing their view of religion and more criticizing their armchair sociology, their bastardization of history, because a lot of the right-wing griftosphere, they love religion. They talk about Judeo-Christianity as the foundation of Western civilization, but they primarily, outside of a few sophomoric arguments, are mostly arguing that religion is useful. They're making an instrumental argument for religion and tradition. And there's a certain circularity there because they're drawing a lot of their social concepts from their religious upbringing, and then they're backfilling their priors with religion. Religion also provides a neat and tidy explanation of authority because they can invoke divine authority for the hierarchies that they want to impose in the world. So you may start out in a discussion about religion and whether or not it's true and end up in a sociological discussion about how society functions, or a historical discussion about what terms like Western civilization even mean. They love to talk about things like the Judeo-Christian foundation of Western civilization, and yet they're a bit light on the details. They're ignoring the long shadow cast by our pagan ancestors, the actual origins of laws. They, of course, want to present a sanitized, you only have a high school education and never cared about history, specious argument version of history, in which allegedly all the foundations of our society, whatever that's supposed to mean, come from Christianity, ignoring things like crusades or religious wars or the persecution of heretics or burning of witches, all the fun dark parts of Christianity in Europe. They want to gloss over all of that and just say, hey, this is responsible for all of modern culture. And of course, that's not true, or at the very least, it's a far more complicated discussion than that. But that, again, is veering into the topic of history and less the topic of religion. The third bucket of people making content about religion on YouTube that might be responded to are what I would call the influencer crowd, because YouTube has changed a lot since the days of OG YouTube atheism. It's a completely different ballgame, and videos like this probably seem pretty quaint by comparison. And you get like youth pastor with a camera, really polished, slick people who are basically doing things like mommy blogger with a religious bent type videos, or the clean-cut all-American Christian couple talking about their lives and doing Bible study type videos with their audience. But look, here's the thing. Those people, in a way, they're playing their own game. They're doing their own little, like I said, youth pastor shtick or influencer shtick, and they're not really the sort of people that you respond to in a let me debunk your religious, because then you get cast as the sort of obnoxious, snarky atheist that, you know, you have this would be a bad juxtaposition with those like clean-cut, wholesome people. Okay, let's get real here. I would only be owning myself. It would be cringe, as the kids would say. Now, there still is what you might call atheist bait content, where someone's like, 15 reasons why atheism is totally illogical. And there's plenty of shock pastors who make the mistake of streaming their church sermons where they say outrageous things, and you can farm that for content if you have the patience to watch it. But honestly, I just don't feel like responding to those people. For one thing, I've noticed that those types of people, that your typical religious proselytizer type, they love to talk at you. And so, yes, you could, I don't know, make a response, and it can be enjoyable for the people who already agree with you, but that's not all that interesting to me. What I realized a long time ago is that there's a whole host of conversational frames and dynamics that when you engage with those sorts of people, they can essentially trap you in. And, for example, the entire label atheist in that world they have a whole script that they're going to fire off as soon as they encounter somebody, a self-described atheist. And I don't particularly even bother that much with the label anymore. It's technically true. But if I was going to label myself for the purpose of having a discussion with somebody about religion, I'd be more likely to call myself something like a militant agnostic. I don't know, and you don't know either. Why? Because that breaks the typical frame, the script they have queued up about, well, atheism this, it's illogical that. Not because I don't have any answers for those sorts of arguments, it's because I'm tired of them. Because on one hand, as I've gotten older, I've become more tolerant to an extent. I don't think that we can make every human being rational, get everybody on the same page thinking the same way, and it probably wouldn't even be desirable if we could. But at the same time, I've also become more militant in the sense that, or dismissive might be a better word for it. And I made this comparison in the comment section. Somebody was talking about, well, you know, Harris needs to go out there and state her policy positions and explain this and explain that and take interviews. And I'm thinking, yeah, Trump can just get away with utter lunacy, and the media just goes, oh, that's just Trump being Trump. But it's like you have two contestants. Contestant number one has to score 1,600 on the SATs. Contestant number two, we're going to judge your attempts at interpretive dance. Go. And whoever scores higher wins. It's complete asymmetry in the expectations. And I feel that's sometimes that way with religion and being dismissive. Because Christianity, to me, at this point in my life, I was raised one. It was what I was taught to believe as a child, and I took that for granted. As a teenager, I got more into it for a brief time and got into the whole being saved evangelical thing. And then I started to question that and move away from that, and then eventually reject it altogether. And that was decades ago. And now I'm at a point in my life where it's like, okay, this is a religion based on blood magic, human sacrifice, and ritual cannibalism. And I'm supposed to, so it's like in this corner is the blood magic, human sacrifice, ritual cannibalism person, and they want to know how I could not believe that. Again, it's like, score 1,600 on the SATs, we're going to judge you on the basis of interpretive dance. This is a complete asymmetry of expectations. And I just don't really have the patience. It's like, you can believe what you want to believe. I'm not out to change everyone's minds. Although, if you want to change minds, I have some suggestions about the ways in which I think OG YouTube atheism went wrong and what it could do differently and what people do now that I think works better. I can have that discussion. But at the same time, I'm just like, are you serious? I'm supposed to have a serious debate defending my position when their position is that? Like, come on. The complete asymmetry, double standards of expectations, I don't really have that much patience for anymore. At the same time, I recognize that when it comes to changing people's minds, as I was alluding to a second ago, being flippant like that probably doesn't work that well under most situations. You have to sort of gently, slowly, get them to take enough steps back where they go, oh, all of these sin and laws in the New Testament and sacrificing of the fetid calf, that's blood magic. And, I was taught I had personal relationship with Jesus, but he died on the cross for me, that he was a human sacrifice to the aforementioned blood magic because God got tired of sacrificing goats or something. And then the main sacrament of Christianity is ritual cannibalism. Now, some people would say it's entirely symbolic. The Catholics would argue that when the priest says the magic words, it literally does transform into the body and blood of Christ. And of course, this has parallels with all the surrounding paganisms of the time. Mystery cults is where you get things like the human sacrifice and the eating the blood, drinking the blood and eating the flesh of the god. It comes from Greco-Roman mystery cults. So none of it's surprising. But again, you have to sort of gently guide people to a place where they can take enough steps back where they go, oh, okay, yeah, now I understand what this is. Because one thing I realized is that I don't want to fall into some sort of trap of saying that non-believers or people who walk away from religion are this type of person or that type of person, but I think in a general sense, there has to be some inclination to question certain fundamental assumptions of your society, of the people around you, because the seeming default of human beings is to go along with whatever the people around you and your society at large say is right and true. Now, for example, Christianity, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 billion Christians and 8 billion roughly people on earth. So 3/4 of the people on earth don't believe what a Christian believes. But so long as everyone around you believes that, then that's not really a problem, because obviously those other people are just a bunch of heathens. And, well, their societies are so full of problems. And our societies are clearly, the only problems in our societies just comes from the people who don't believe what we believe, because all people who believe what we believe are right and proper people. And, if only they would believe what we believed, then we could make the world this wonderful, happy place. Again, these are understandable human pitfalls based on cognitive bias that people commonly fall into. And it takes being able to say, you know what, I think that the people around me and my society is in some sense fundamentally wrong, that we take XYZ for granted, but we shouldn't. That, hey, wait a minute, these beliefs are actually ridiculous in spite of how widespread they are. I think it takes a certain type of person that it cuts against the grain of what is the path of least resistance for most human psychology. In the last roughly 5 years or so, I've drifted towards certain content that in some ways I think does a better job than the OG YouTube atheist style of, let me tell you why your argument is stupid. Because while there's a certain benefit to the whole snarky atheist routine, in another way, as I was just saying, I feel like you have to just have people take steps backwards from where they're at till they can look at it from enough distance to see it for what it is. And you can't necessarily mock people into that position. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Myth Vision, in which he talks about biblical scholarship, the history of the Bible, the socio-political context surrounding it. Because that's one area of approach. When you want to talk about religion, a particular religion, it helps to understand what came before that religion, what surrounded that religion, what informed, what went into the text that's not obvious from within the text. As I already said, you wonder, well, what's with this whole drink the blood, eat the flesh of the dying and resurrecting God that in many ways stems from mystery cults that were contemporary at the time. A lot of ideas like blood magic come from surrounding paganism. When I was growing up and being taught to believe in Christianity, I'm sure this is true of pretty much any other religion in which there's a comparable situation. It's just handed to you from birth. There was no greater context to what I was being told. There was no real drawing parallels or explaining the surrounding history. It was just self-contained as you have to understand this from within itself. Once you start to understand something like the Bible from a more 360-degree context, then the pedestal that it's put on by the "this is what's true, just believe it" starts to erode, and you can gain perspective on it and take a step back. You understand that there were religions and mythologies that it's clearly borrowing from that came long before a single jot or tittle of the Bible was written, that it was influenced by other societies, that within itself, its views on the Bible's views on things like God probably evolved from a more pagan, polytheistic view of gods, plural, narrowing it down to a singular God. Once you start to understand those sorts of topics, then you can approach the entire subject from a greater distance, and then you can start to see, like, okay, there's blood magic, human sacrifice, ritual cannibalism. Also, I've seen a lot of interview shows from people who have deconverted from religion. There's several I can recommend in that vein. I seem to like nowadays a lot of various interview shows, not necessarily all talking about religion. And what I gather from a lot of those videos, although not everyone's story is the same, is that what starts to change their mind is learning new information about things that they had previously taken for granted. For example, like I said, the history of the Bible and of religion in general that makes them start to see things in a different way. Maybe they learn about evolution or some other subject that challenges their view, but it can be a combination of different things. But it's usually what they learn new about the world, rather than some argument was defeated or they were ridiculed out of it. Occasionally, like in the example of Mormonism, there can just be genuine silver bullets. There's something in Mormonism called the CES letter. The CES stands for Church Education System. And there was a young man, I don't remember his name off the top of my head, who sat down one day and wrote out all these historical problems with the Mormon Church. And he sends it to his CES teacher, because they have a sort of seminary Bible study system within the LDS Church, and it's essentially stumped his teacher. And he published this online, and it's just this list of all kinds of historical problems and various problems with the church. And there are definitely some people who read that, and it just silver bullets them. They by the time they're done reading it, they're out of the church altogether, and many of them. Some of them go for more generalized Christianity, and some of them are just like, well, I'm done with religion altogether. Because once you start to understand that your society and the people around you can be fundamentally wrong about things like religion or their attitudes or beliefs, once that idea is in your head, it can go in a lot of different directions. And so I think that people learning more, learning to recontextualize what they took for granted, learning to question things, including the people in society around them, that is a more efficacious path towards getting them to question things like religion than snarky arguments. And I feel, going back to what I was saying about not really wanting to engage in the same way with the same sort of atheist bait videos, is that I feel like there was a previous dynamic where it became about passing the buck over who has the burden of proof. You have the burden of proof. No, you have the burden of proof. No, you have the burden of proof. This constant, again, the religious people like to talk at you, so they're going to make these atheist bait videos where they're basically going to say that you have to prove that you have why you don't believe. And the atheist comes along and says, no, you have to prove why you do believe. You have to show that there's evidence for God. And to say where I'm at, I really think that regardless of who's right in those sorts of debates over who has the burden of proof, I would be more inclined towards making a more positive case against religion. Because, in my view, human beings invent religions. Now, I have an actual case to make for that. It's not an obvious thing about, well, you show me the proof or I'm not going to believe. No. Again, if we look at the history of the world and human societies and what humans have believed over time, there have been countless religions. And so I would say that the best explanation, given a broad variety of historical context, psychological context, and other lines of evidence, that human beings invent religions. So why would any given one be true? And if you can get people to question the nature of religious belief itself, you're most of the way there, as far as I'm concerned. But there's an actual positive argument to be made. It's just not crossing your arms and saying, well, the burden of proof is on you. Because that I've seen where that goes, and the answer is not very far. But again, I've, in some ways, as militant as I can be, and as dismissive as I can be, have mellowed out in terms of, I don't really care that much about people's personal belief. I'm not on any sort of crusade to change everyone's mind or convert everyone to atheism. I think there are specific parts of religion that are harmful, specific constructions of religion that are harmful. And in many ways, we're kind of living through a bit of a golden age of documentaries about the harmful aspects of religion. There's documentaries like Let Us Pray and Shiny Happy People and several others that I can't summon to mind at the moment. But there's been a lot of great documentaries recently, a lot of great content where people are being interviewed about their deconversion stories or their experiences with religion. And in many ways, I find these interview channels where people are telling their stories is much more powerful and impactful than a lot of the snarky atheist content of old. But to bring it full circle, a lot of the most dangerous, threatening aspects of religion are the ones who have politicized it and are right-wing conservative Christian nationalists who are all in for Trump. So again, 6 of one, half dozen of another. Part of the reason I make political content is because I don't want to see the further progress and rise of a right-wing movement that is steeped in religious conservatism. Trump himself is obviously not religious, but he is their vehicle. He is their savior. He is the chosen one to them. He is the means by which they'll be able to foist their agenda on the rest of us. It's so over and above my personal distaste for the man, there's also that. And that really hasn't changed. Again, back in 2006, they were worshiping a cardboard cutout of George W. Bush. Not worshiping, they were praying to a cardboard cutout of George W. Bush in Jesus Camp back in 2006. And it's the same continuous movement. The Republican Party increasingly became a Christian nationalist party. And you may not like the fact that I make political content, but it's less about the whole tax policy thing or the liberal agenda that I want to foist on other people, and more about the dangers of their agenda. In terms of the types of content that I used to make, and making content about contemporary politics, there is a thread of continuity between those things, even if I don't explicitly state it at all times. All that being said, there are certain videos that I want to make about the topic of religion, some of them playing off the things that I was just talking about, the great documentaries that have been released recently, the types of interview channels and scholarship channels, and the sort of content talking about religion that is not coming at it from the same OG YouTube atheist angle of the past. For one thing that's interested me is, for want of a better way to put it, talking about the intergenerational trauma nature of religious belief in contemporary America with roughly the baby boomer generation and on to subsequent generations. Because one thing, as I've watched some of these interviews and documentaries, is that a lot of the people roughly my age or somewhat younger who I've seen in documentaries or interviews, when they talk about their parents, often their parents were converts who in the 60s, 70s, maybe the 80s, during socially tumultuous times, gravitated towards religion to give them structure and certainty, and many of them became somewhat hyperfixated on it and then imposed it on their children with, psychological consequences of how, high control religion, it was a great idea for the parents, but then when they imposed it on their children, it had XYZ consequences. That's an interesting subject that I'd like to explore more, but I don't know at this point if I have anything more than just like, hey, observe this. And I've already just now summarized some of my observations. So aside from that, I'm interested in what the audience, my longtime audience, would like to see me talk about in that discussion. I've always been relatively open to audience input, audience suggestions of what they would like to see me talk about, even if I don't always throw it open to that, even if I've by and large been pretty inconsistent. I'm starting to get back into the rhythm of releasing a video, if not every week, then every other week, and hopefully I can continue that at a reasonable pace for the foreseeable future. But who knows with me? It's ADHD brain. What can I say? Anyway, feel free to give me your input and have a good whatever time it is.